The air conditioning in Horizon Tech's Austin office was always set a few degrees too low. It felt fitting for the atmosphere Craig Whitefield cultivated, cold, uncomfortable, and designed to keep everyone on edge. It was 10 a.m. on a Thursday. The weekly all hands meeting was in full swing in the center of the open space office. 70 employees stood in a semicircle, holding lukewarm coffee, while Craig paced in front of the massive whiteboard. Rachel stood near the back, perfectly still. She wore her usual neutral attire, a gray blazer and a plain white shirt. Her role as head of analytics was to blend in, observe, and crunch the numbers. For the past 6 months, she had done exactly that. But yesterday, during the board deck review, she had made a fatal mistake in Craig's eyes. She pointed out a discrepancy in his churn rate projections. It was a purely mathematical correction, but to Craig, it was an act of treason. We are entering a crucial phase. Craig's voice boomed over the room. He liked the sound of his own voice. The Series C money isn't just a cushion, it's a mandate. We need a team that rows in the same direction. We need alignment. Rachel saw Priya, a senior data engineer, shift uncomfortably next to her. Jake, from marketing, stared fixedly at his shoes. Everyone knew what alignment meant. It meant blind obedience. Which brings me to a difficult but necessary decision, Craig continued, stopping his pacing. His eyes locked onto Rachel. The room followed his gaze. Rachel Bennett, could you step forward? Rachel didn't hesitate. She took 3 steps forward, her face a mask of polite interest. Rachel, your technical work has been adequate. However, a startup requires more than just running SQL queries. It requires a specific culture fit. Yesterday, it became clear to me and to the leadership that you lack the collaborative spirit we need. You don't fit the Horizon culture. A collective, silent gasp rippled through the employees. Public firings were Craig's signature move, a psychological tactic to keep the rest of the herd docile. But targeting the head of analytics, someone who had optimized their entire back-end tracking, was bold. Rachel glanced past Craig to the glass-walled office at the back. David Langford, the CEO, was inside. He was watching through the glass, his face pale. David knew that their lead venture fund had demanded a blind assessment of the management team. He knew a spy was in the ranks, but he didn't know who. He clearly believed Craig's decision was just another day of aggressive management. So, Craig said, folding his arms, effective immediately, we are letting you go. HR has already locked your Slack and email. Please pack your desk. A security guard will walk you out. Rachel held Craig's gaze. There was no tears, no anger, no panic, just cold, clinical observation. She was assessing a failing asset. Understood, Craig, Rachel said quietly. Her voice carried easily in the dead silent room. She turned around and walked to her desk. Priya looked like she was about to cry. Jake mouthed, I'm so sorry. Rachel picked up her personal notebook and her favorite pen. That was it. She didn't need anything else. She checked her phone. It was 10:14 a.m. She typed a quick text to a contact saved only as MR. Cover blown. Execution initiated. Call David in exactly 60 minutes. She picked up her bag and walked toward the elevator. Craig watched her go, a smirk of triumph playing on his lips. He thought he had just eliminated a threat. He didn't realize he had just handed her the detonator. The heavy glass doors of the Horizon Tech building slid shut behind Rachel. The intense heat of the Austin morning hit her instantly, a sharp contrast to the freezing, over-conditioned air of the office she had just been exiled from. She didn't look back. She walked across Congress Avenue, her pace steady and unhurried. She walked into a quiet, dimly lit artisanal coffee shop. The barista, a college student with a nose ring, barely looked up. Double espresso, black, Rachel ordered. She took her cup to a secluded corner booth in the back, shielded from the street view. She sat down, took a sip of the bitter, scalding coffee, and reached into her leather tote bag. She bypassed her Horizon-issued laptop, which was already useless, remote wiped by HR minutes ago, and pulled out her personal encrypted iPad Pro. With a biometric scan and a 12-character passcode, the screen unlocked. She wasn't Rachel Bennett, the quiet mid-level data cruncher, anymore. The interface of Vanguard Ventures' secure internal network loaded instantly. Here, she was Rachel Bennett, senior partner and lead auditor. She opened the master file labeled Project Horizon, Series C, Tranche 2. For 6 months, Rachel had played her part perfectly. Vanguard had already injected $15 million into Horizon Tech. The second tranche, a massive $40 million, was contingent on a management and operational audit. Startups often looked great on paper, but were held together by duct tape and toxic culture in reality. Vanguard's board wanted a blind assessment, and Rachel had volunteered. She liked being in the trenches. It was where the real data lived. She opened a new terminal window and began compiling her final report. Subject: Craig Whitfield, COO. Assessment: Critical liability. Notes: Whitfield relies on intimidation over strategy. He actively suppresses data that contradicts his narrative. During the Q3 board deck review yesterday, I identified a severe anomaly. Whitfield has been categorizing paused subscriptions as active to artificially deflate the churn rate. It wasn't just a simple mistake. Craig was intentionally cooking the books to make the company look healthier for Vanguard's upcoming valuation check. When Rachel had gently pointed out the error in front of the team, Craig hadn't just felt his authority threatened, he felt his fraud being exposed. His decision to fire her wasn't just about culture fit. It was a panicked attempt to remove the one person who understood the math well enough to catch him. She typed her final recommendation. Recommendation: immediate termination of Craig Whitfield for cause, financial misrepresentation. Halt Tranche 2 funding until executive restructuring is complete. She hit send, the file encrypted and uploaded to the Vanguard servers in San Francisco. She checked her watch. It was 10:35 a.m. She opened her secure messaging app and texted Marcus Reyes, the managing partner at Vanguard and her closest ally. Rachel, report uploaded. The COO just fired me in an all-hands meeting. He's hiding a 14% churn spike. It's broad, Marcus. Marcus, I'm reading it now. Fired you? Seriously? Rachel, in front of 70 people, said I wasn't a culture fit. Marcus, he's going to need a parachute, a cheap one. Give me 40 minutes. I'll make the call. Rachel smiled, took another sip of her espresso, and leaned back. The trap was set. Meanwhile, on the top floor of Horizon Tech, Craig Whitfield was riding a wave of pure adrenaline. He walked back into the executive suite, a wide, self-satisfied grin on his face. He felt like a general who had just won a decisive battle. The open space floor was dead silent. Employees were staring at their monitors, typing furiously, too afraid to even whisper. Perfect, Craig thought. Fear is the ultimate productivity tool. He poured himself a fresh cup of premium pour-over coffee and walked straight into David Langford's glass-walled office without knocking. David, the CEO and founder, was sitting at his desk, his head buried in his hands. He looked up, his face pale and drawn. Well, that went perfectly, Craig said, dropping into the expensive leather chair opposite David. He kicked one leg over the other. I think the message was received loud and clear. We are a lean, aggressive machine now. No dead weight. David rubbed his temples. Craig, did you really have to do it in front of the whole company? And did it have to be Rachel? She literally built our back-end analytics from scratch. She was a drone, David, Craig scoffed, waving a hand dismissively. She lacked vision. Worse, she was a bottleneck. Did you see her yesterday questioning my numbers on the eve of the Vanguard audit? That's not a team player. That's a saboteur. David sighed, turning to his monitor. The stock market ticker was green, but his stomach was in knots. I'm just worried about Vanguard. We need that $40 million next week, Craig. We are burning through cash. And Marcus Reyes made it explicitly clear that they have a blind assessor somewhere in this building. Craig laughed. It was a loud, grating sound. David, you're paranoid. Do you really think Vanguard put a spy in the analytics department? If they have a spy, it's probably one of the VP level hires. And frankly, VC firms respect strong leadership. When this spy reports back, they'll say Horizon Tech has a COO who makes tough calls and cuts out the weak links. They love that alpha mentality. I hope you're right, David muttered, checking his email for the 100th time. If Vanguard pulls out, we won't make payroll by October. They won't pull out. The numbers look fantastic, Craig said, omitting the fact that the numbers looked fantastic precisely because he had manipulated them. The digital clock on David's desk flipped to 11:13 a.m. The office was quiet. The low hum of the air conditioning was the only sound. Craig finished his coffee, preparing to go back out and patrol the floor. He wanted to make sure Priya and Jake were back to writing code, not mourning their fired colleague. At exactly 11:14 a.m., the heavy, black, multi-line phone on David's desk lit up. A sharp, urgent ring pierced the quiet office. David glanced at the caller ID. The blood completely drained from his face. Incoming call, Marcus Reyes, Vanguard Ventures. David's hand shook slightly as he reached for the receiver. He cleared his throat, trying to find his normal, confident CEO voice. Marcus, good morning. How are things in San Francisco? David asked, his voice an octave higher than usual. David, Marcus's voice came through the line. It wasn't the usual friendly, booming greeting. It was flat, cold, and entirely devoid of emotion. We have a critical situation. David swallowed hard. Craig stopped at the door, turning around, his self-satisfied smirk faltering slightly. What kind of situation, Marcus? David asked. Is your COO, Craig Whitfield, in the room with you? Marcus demanded. David looked at Craig. Craig noted, motioning for David to put the call on speaker. Yes, Marcus, David said, pressing the speakerphone button. Craig is right here. Good, Marcus said, his voice now echoing loudly in the glass office. Craig, I understand you had a very busy morning. You fired our lead auditor, and I am looking at a report that says you are committing financial fraud. Let's talk about your churn rate. The silence in the CEO's glass-walled office was so absolute that the faint rhythmic kicking of David's designer wall clock sounded like a judge's gavel. Craig Whitfield stood frozen. The self-satisfied smirk that had lived on his face all morning had vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed expression of pure shock. He stared at the black multi-line phone on the desk as if it were a live grenade. Lead auditor? David whispered, his voice cracking. He gripped the edge of his mahogany desk. Marcus, what are you talking about? Rachel Bennett is our head of analytics. She was just let go for a culture fit issue an hour ago. Rachel Bennett, Marcus's voice cut through the speaker, sharp and unforgiving, is a senior partner at Vanguard Ventures. She is the proxy holder for our fund. She currently controls 51% of your voting shares, David. She doesn't just work for Horizon Tech. She practically owns it. David slumped back into his heavy ergonomic chair, the blood draining completely from his face. The blind assessment, the spy. It hadn't been a newly hired VP. It hadn't been a hotshot marketing director. It was the quiet, methodical woman who sat in the corner of the open space floor, running SQL queries, optimizing dashboards, and never taking the bait on office politics. Craig finally found his voice. It was a full octave higher than usual, frantic and desperate. Marcus, this is insane. This is a complete misunderstanding. Whatever she told you, the data she pulled, it was an experimental projection model. It wasn't finalized for the board. She's taking it out of context. Don't insult my intelligence, Craig. Marcus's tone dropped to a dangerous low.
Rachel just sent me the raw server logs. You didn't run a projection. You actively manipulated the active user database. You reclassified 600 paused accounts as active to artificially suppress the Q3 churn rate. That is not a culture fit issue, Craig. That is corporate fraud. I was protecting the valuation, Craig yelled, losing his composure and slamming his hand on the desk. I was doing what was necessary for this company to survive your audit. You were protecting your own year-end bonus, Marcus replied coldly. Rachel has officially invoked her executive veto. Tranche 2 is frozen pending a full forensic audit. Furthermore, per Vanguard's terms of investment, Craig Whitfield is hereby terminated for cause, effective immediately. David, you are to revoke all his system access right now and have him escorted from the premises. Terminated? Craig gasped, taking a step back. He looked at David for help, but the CEO wouldn't even meet his eyes. David was already typing on his laptop, disabling Craig's administrator rights. And David, Marcus added, his tone softening just a fraction, I suggest you clear Craig's desk before Rachel gets back upstairs. She doesn't have a lot of patience for him right now. Gets back? Craig choked out. Down on the main floor, the atmosphere was a mix of a funeral and a hostage situation. Nobody was talking. Priya was aggressively typing meaningless code into her IDE, trying to ignore the glaringly empty desk in the analytics corner. Jake was silently deleting the entire culture fit section from his upcoming marketing presentation. The terror Craig had instilled was working perfectly.
Ding! The elevator doors opened with a soft, melodic chime. Priya instinctively looked up and froze, her fingers hovering motionless over her mechanical keyboard. Jake dropped his stylus. It clattered loudly against his desk, echoing in the quiet room. Rachel Bennett stepped out of the elevator. She wasn't carrying a cardboard box. She wasn't accompanied by a security guard. She was holding her sleek, encrypted iPad, her posture perfectly straight, her face an unreadable mask of calm authority. The entire open space went dead silent. 70 heads turned to watch her. Rachel didn't look at any of them. She bypassed her old desk entirely. Her heels clicked rhythmically against the polished concrete floor as she walked in a straight line toward the executive glass office at the back of the room. Inside the office, Craig was in a state of blind panic. He was frantically shoving his Mont Blanc pens, his personalized leather notebook, and his expensive noise-canceling headphones into his designer briefcase. He froze as the glass door slid open. Rachel stood in the doorway. She looked exactly as she had an hour ago, wearing the same neutral gray blazer and white shirt, but the energy around her had completely shifted. She was no longer a subordinate. She was the executioner. Rachel, David stammered, scrambling to his feet so his chair slammed against the back wall. I had no idea. Vanguard didn't tell me. Rachel held up a single finger, silencing the CEO instantly. She still didn't look at him. Her eyes were locked onto Craig, who was clutching his briefcase to his chest like a shield. Rachel, you have exactly 5 minutes to leave this building, Craig, she said quietly. Her voice easily penetrated the open door, carrying just enough for the closest employees, including a wide-eyed Priya and Jake, to hear. If you are not in the elevator by then, I will have building security physically drag you out. Craig's mouth trembled. His authoritative persona had completely collapsed. You can't do this. I built the operations of this company. You built a house of cards, Rachel corrected smoothly, stepping aside and gesturing toward the exit. 5 minutes, Craig, and this time it really isn't about culture fit. Craig Whitfield's exit was not the triumphant, legacy-defining departure he had ever envisioned for himself. It was a chaotic, embarrassing scramble. He fumbled with the gold-plated latch on his designer leather briefcase, his hands shaking so violently that he nearly dropped his prized noise-canceling headphones onto the floor of the executive suite. He looked like a cornered animal, entirely stripped of the artificial alpha male bravado he used to terrorize the staff. All the management seminars and power posing techniques meant absolutely nothing in the face of raw, unadulterated equity control. Rachel Bennett didn't move an inch. She stood firm, blocking the center of the sliding glass doorway, forcing Craig to awkwardly squeeze past her. He refused to make eye contact. His face flushed a deep, mottled red. As Craig crossed the threshold out of the office, the atmosphere on the main floor shifted dramatically. 70 employees were watching. No one was pretending to type anymore. The rhythmic, mechanical clatter of keyboards had completely ceased. The only sound in the massive room was the frantic squeak of Craig's expensive Italian leather shoes against the polished concrete. He walked down the central aisle, the exact same path Rachel had taken an hour earlier when he had fired her. But while Rachel's walk was calm and measured, Craig's was a desperate sprint. Priya, sitting at the data engineering pod, watched him pass. She didn't offer a sympathetic nod. Jake, standing near the marketing whiteboard, actively crossed his arms, his posture radiating quiet defiance. They had endured months of Craig's psychological games, his impossible deadlines, and his public humiliations. Seeing the architect of their misery fleeing the building was a surreal experience. Craig reached the elevators and frantically smashed the down button, his breath hitching. When the doors finally opened, he practically dove inside. The metal doors slid shut. He was gone. Back in the glass office, David Langford was still hyperventilating slightly. The CEO looked completely deflated, sinking deep into his chair. He looked at Rachel as if he were seeing a ghost. "Rachel," David started, his voice trembling, "I swear to you, I didn't know about the numbers. The churn rate, he presented it as final. I trusted his operations background." Rachel walked over to David's desk and closed his open laptop with a decisive snap. "Acknowledgement is not a defense, David. You are the chief executive officer. You allowed a toxic operator to weaponize HR policies to hide financial fraud. Vanguard entrusted you with $15 million, and you let a bully run the company into the ground because you were too afraid of conflict to audit his work." David looked down at his desk, thoroughly reprimanded. "What happens now?" "Now," Rachel said, tapping her iPad, "we freeze all external spending. I am bringing in an independent forensic accounting team from San Francisco tomorrow morning. You and I are going to sit down and rebuild the Q3 board deck from scratch using actual data. And if I find out you had any knowledge of Craig's accounting fiction, you will be in the next elevator down." David nodded quickly. "Understood, completely understood." "Good," Rachel replied. "Stay here. I need to address the floor." She turned and walked out of the glass office, stepping onto the open space floor. The silence was still deafening. Every single pair of eyes was locked onto her. The woman they thought was a quiet, introverted numbers cruncher had just decapitated the second in command of the company. Rachel walked to the center of the room, standing in the exact spot Craig had occupied during the all-hands meeting just an hour ago. "Could I have everyone's attention, please?" Rachel said clearly. She didn't need to shout. The room was pin-drop quiet. "As you just witnessed, Craig Whitfield is no longer with Horizon Tech. I know many of you are confused. Let me clarify the situation. I am not just the head of analytics. I am a senior partner at Vanguard Ventures, our lead investor. For the past 6 months, I have been conducting a blind operational assessment of this company." A collective murmur rippled through the room. Jake let out a low whistle. "Craig was terminated for cause, specifically for manipulating user data to misrepresent our financial health. That behavior ends today. From this moment forward, Horizon Tech will operate on absolute transparency. No more altered metrics. No more culture fit purges to silence dissenting opinions. We are a data-driven company, and the data does not lie." She looked directly at the engineering pod. Priya jumped slightly in her chair. "Yes, Rachel?" "The real churn numbers, the ones we looked at on Tuesday before Craig locked the database. Do you still have the backup logs?"
Priya smiled for the first time in months. I do. I saved them on a secure local drive. Excellent, Rachel nodded. Upload them to the main server. Jake? Jake stood up a little straighter. Yeah? Scrap the Q3 marketing strategy Craig gave you. It's based on fake retention numbers. We are pausing all ad spend until we know exactly who our real users are. I want a new proposal on my desk by Monday. You got it, Jake said, relief washing over his face.
Rachel looked around the room, making eye contact with the exhausted, overworked team. We have a lot of work to do to secure the next round of funding, but the fear tactics are over. You are all here because you are talented. Do your jobs, trust the data, and we will turn this ship around. Let's get to work. Slowly, tentatively, the sound of typing returned to the room. It wasn't the frantic, terrified clatter of the morning. It was steady. It was productive. The fog of war had lifted. The next morning, the Austin office felt fundamentally different. The oppressive, anxiety-inducing atmosphere of Craig Whitfield's regime had evaporated overnight, replaced by the sterile, hyper-focused energy of a Vanguard Ventures audit. At exactly 8 a.m., the glass doors of Horizon Tech slid open, and a team of 4 forensic accountants from San Francisco walked in. They were dressed in sharp, understated suits. They didn't smile, they didn't make small talk, and they carried heavy, encrypted laptops. They bypassed the reception desk entirely, marching straight into the executive suite. Rachel had repurposed Craig's old corner office into a war room. The walls, which just yesterday were decorated with Craig's framed inspirational quotes and vanity press clippings, had been stripped bare. Now they were covered with massive whiteboards, rapidly filling up with complex diagrams of Horizon's data architecture and financial flows. Priya was entirely in her element. Freed from Craig's arbitrary deadlines and constant micromanagement, she was pulling raw database logs at blinding speed, working directly alongside the lead Vanguard auditor. Look at this, Priya said, pointing at her dual monitor setup. Rachel, holding a coffee, leaned in to inspect the code. He didn't just alter the churn rate on the presentation deck, Priya explained, tracing a line of SQL script with her pen. He built a hidden macro in the backend. It automatically renewed canceled subscription statuses for exactly 48 hours right before the end-of-month reporting snapshot. This system essentially resurrected dead accounts just long enough to be counted as active, inflating the user base by almost 20% on paper. Rachel narrowed her eyes, processing the technical fraud. It's a digital shell game. What about the CAC, customer acquisition cost? Jake, who had been sitting in the corner, cross-referencing historical marketing spend with the new reality, sighed heavily and rubbed his eyes. It's a bloodbath, Rachel, Jake said, holding up a printout. He was classifying massive enterprise software purchases, like our internal CRM upgrades and server space, as R&D instead of operational or marketing expenses. It made our user acquisition strategy look incredibly efficient to the board. In reality, we were bleeding cash to acquire low-value users while hiding the true cost of running the business. The picture was grim. The company was burning through cash much faster than David Langford or the board had realized, but it was real. Rachel preferred an ugly, undeniable truth over a beautiful, fragile lie. At noon, Rachel summoned David into the war room. The CEO looked like he hadn't slept in a week. His usually perfectly styled hair was messy, his tie was loose, and the charismatic bounce in his step was completely gone. He walked in tentatively and sat down at the glass conference table, staring at the complex flowcharts of fraud mapped out in red marker on the whiteboards. "How bad is it?" David asked, quietly, his voice hollow. "Fatal if left untreated," Rachel replied, taking a seat across from him and sliding a thick, freshly printed executive summary across the glass. Your COO wasn't just managing aggressively, he was running a Ponzi scheme with your user metrics. If Vanguard had blindly wired the $40 million for Tranche 2 next week based on these numbers, the SEC would eventually be involved. Craig would have faced federal prison time, and you, as the signing chief executive officer, would have been sitting in the cell right next to him. David swallowed hard, his hands trembling slightly as he stared at the Vanguard logo on the report. I trusted him, Rachel. He had a stellar track record. He came highly recommended by our early angel investors. I didn't think I needed to audit my own partner. He was a parasite, Rachel interrupted, her voice flat, devoid of any sympathy. But parasites only thrive in a weakened host. David flinched. You are the founder of this company, David. You built a brilliant core software product. The code is good, the market need is real, but as a CEO, you were completely asleep at the wheel. You let a bully intimidate your engineers, silence your analysts, and blindfold you with vanity metrics because you didn't want to get your hands dirty with the day-to-day operations. You wanted the glory of being a founder without the burden of being a boss. David looked up, a sudden flash of defensive anger in his tired eyes. I am a product visionary. I hired Craig to handle the operations so I could focus on the big picture, the strategy. A vision without execution is just a hallucination, Rachel fired back instantly, shutting down his defense. You cannot outsource accountability. That is the lesson Vanguard is forcing you to learn today. Silence stretched in the war room. The low hum of the servers and the distant, rapid chatter of the forensic accountants were the only sounds. David looked back down at the damning report, the anger draining out of him, leaving only exhaustion and a profound sense of failure. So, what is Vanguard's play? David asked, defeated. Am I being replaced? Am I out? Rachel sat back in her chair, folding her hands in her lap. Marcus Reyes wanted you gone yesterday. He wanted to strip you of your equity and install a Vanguard puppet as interim CEO. David closed his eyes. But, Rachel said smoothly, I convinced him otherwise. David's eyes snapped open. Why? Because of what I saw on the floor over the last 6 months, Rachel explained. Priya stayed late last night to fix the database architecture, not because she was afraid of being fired, but because she genuinely believes in the software you designed. Jake is rewriting the entire marketing plan from scratch because he believes in the market fit you identified. The core of Horizon Tech is solid. The product works. The culture was sick, but the tumor has been removed. Rachel leaned forward, tapping the table for emphasis. You have exactly 6 months, David. Tranche 2 is officially frozen. Vanguard will authorize a bridge loan of $5 million by tomorrow morning, just enough to keep the lights on, pay the server bills, and make payroll. But the remaining $35 million stays locked in San Francisco until this company hits its real KPIs. David listened, hanging on to every word. No more shortcuts, Rachel stated, her tone absolute. No more fake numbers, no more hiding in your glass office. You are going to step out onto that floor, get back into the trenches with your team, and actually lead them. You are going to earn their respect, not mandate it. David looked at the whiteboard filled with red ink, then back at Rachel. The blind panic that had gripped him since yesterday was slowly receding, replaced by a sobering, heavy realization of the mountain he now had to climb. He took a deep breath and nodded slowly. Okay, David said, his voice finding a fraction of its old strength. Where do we start? We start by telling the board the truth, Rachel said, standing up and handing him a dry erase marker. Draft an email to all investors. We show them the rot, and then we show them the scalpel. Let's get to work. 6 months later, the Horizon Tech office no longer felt like a battlefield. The oppressive, sterile tension of the Craig Whitfield era had been completely scrubbed from the building. But the most significant physical change wasn't the upgraded server racks or the new ergonomic chairs. It was the total absence of the executive glass office at the back of the room. David Langford had ordered the glass walls dismantled over a single weekend in late August. His heavy mahogany desk was gone. He now worked out on the main floor, sitting at a standard workstation right next to the data engineering pod. It was a Friday afternoon in late January. The Austin winter had brought a rare, biting chill to the city, but inside the office, the energy was warm, vibrant, and relentlessly focused.
The weekly all-hands meeting was in full swing, but it looked absolutely nothing like the tense, hostage-like gatherings of the past. David stood near the main whiteboard, a dry erase marker in his hand. He looked tired, but it was a healthy, earned exhaustion. "Okay, let's look at the final numbers for Q4, David said, projecting a live dashboard onto the large screen. Our churn rate is holding steady at 4.2%. It wasn't the miraculous, fabricated 1% metric Craig had once promised the board, but it was authentic, it was real, and most importantly, it was sustainable.
Jake, standing near the front, chimed in. Customer acquisition cost is down 15% this quarter. We stopped buying expensive vanity ads and focused entirely on targeted B2B outreach. The growth curve is slower, but the retention is rock solid. We're acquiring users who actually need our software, not just clicking on clickbait. Priya nodded from her desk. And the backend architecture is finally clean. We've purged all the legacy code and hidden macros from the previous regime. The database is fully transparent. Any investor can pull our logs right now, and they will match the presentation deck perfectly. Standing at the very back of the room, observing the exchange, was Rachel Bennett. She wasn't wearing her neutral camouflage analyst uniform anymore. Today, she wore a sharp, impeccably tailored navy suit. She looked every bit the senior partner and lead auditor of Vanguard Ventures. The disguise was long gone, and with it, the need to hide in the shadows. She held her iPad, glancing at a live, encrypted feed of the same metrics David was projecting. The numbers matched down to the decimal point. David wrapped up the operational meeting to a round of applause, actual, spontaneous applause from the team, and walked over to Rachel. The rest of the office began to filter back to their desks, the low hum of productive collaboration filling the air. "So," David asked, a hint of nervous energy in his voice. He ran a hand through his hair. "What's the verdict? We've been bleeding out for 6 months trying to fix this ship." Rachel didn't smile, but the hard, analytical edge in her eyes had softened considerably. She tapped the screen of her iPad. "I just got off a video call with Marcus Reyes and the rest of the Vanguard board. The forensic audit is officially closed. There are no pending SEC violations. Your Q4 financials are clean, and your operational transparency is exemplary." David exhaled a long, shaky breath, leaning against the edge of a nearby desk. "I didn't think we'd survive October, to be honest. There were a few weeks where I wasn't sure we could even make payroll." "You survived because you stopped hiding behind your title. You got down in the trenches. You let Priya build a proper infrastructure. You let Jake find real customers, and you took the hits when things went wrong. You finally became a CEO, David." She pressed a final, definitive button on her screen. A small, green confirmation checkmark appeared. "Marcus has officially authorized the release of the remaining funds. The $35 million from Tranche 2 will hit Horizon Tech's accounts by Monday morning." David looked at her, genuine, profound gratitude in his eyes. He didn't gloat, he didn't celebrate wildly, he just looked relieved. "Thank you, Rachel. And I don't just mean for the capital. Thank you for the wake-up call. Don't thank me, thank your team. And make sure you don't break this company again, David, because I won't be here to fix it next time." David blinked, caught off guard. "What do you mean? You're leaving?" "My mandate was a 6-month turnaround," Rachel said, adjusting her bag on her shoulder. "The patient is stabilized. The bleeding has stopped. Vanguard needs me back at the headquarters in San Francisco." She paused, looking out the window at the Austin skyline. "We have a logistics startup in Seattle that just reported some very questionable, highly optimistic profit margins. The board is getting suspicious. I think it's time for another blind assessment." David let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. "I pity whoever their COO is." Rachel finally offered a small, sharp smile, the smile of an apex predator heading to a new hunting ground. They usually need a lot of pity. She turned and began to walk across the open space toward the exit. As she passed the engineering pod, Priya and Jake looked up. "Hey, Rachel," Jake called out, a genuine smile on his face. "Have a safe flight back to the West Coast."
Priya didn't say anything, but she met Rachel's eyes, smiled warmly, and gave a small, respectful nod of acknowledgement. Rachel nodded back to them. She walked to the elevators, tracing the exact same path she had taken on the day Craig Whitfield had tried to publicly humiliate her. The elevator doors chimed and slid open. Rachel stepped inside, turned around, and looked out at the bustling, healthy office one last time. Horizon Tech was no longer a fragile house of cards waiting to collapse. It was a fortress. The metal doors slid shut, sealing the office away. Her execution was flawless. Her mission was complete.